Oh, can you tell me how the peace will come at the end of a gunshot, through the end of a gun? And can you tell to me how our children will be free when the bomb blast burns on the far side of town, when the bomb blast burns to the ground?
Most U.S. people believe that the last time nuclear weapons were used was during the Second World War, but in fact that's very far from the truth. And I think it's really very important to understand that nuclear weapons have been an essential element of U.S. global domination, and that remains the case to this day. Before the atomic bomb, we were an empire, and since the atomic bomb, the nuclear weapon has been the ultimate enforcer of U.S. power, what Teddy Roosevelt called the American big stick. In October of 1973, listening to Armed Forces Radio, learned that U.S. forces were on a nuclear alert, broadcast all over the world, and it made no sense. What had happened was that the Israeli army had surrounded and encircled the Egyptian Third Army, which it was not only starving to death, but depriving of water. And there was a secret agreement between Kissinger and Golda Meir that although a ceasefire had been called for, that the U.S. would sort of turn a blind eye if the Israelis wanted to continue taking some more land, and ultimately to kill the entire Egyptian Third Army. The Russians had provided weapons to Egypt prior to the '73 war. They were, as a great power, in part humiliated by what was taking place, and it was taking place to their client state. And so they pressed for Israel to break that siege. They pressed for the United States to break that siege, but Kissinger had his agreement. So the Egyptians went to the United Nations. They appealed for both the United States and the Soviet Union to intervene to break this siege. There was initial silence from the United States. Nixon was dead drunk in Florida in the midst of Watergate. So Kissinger was totally running U.S. Foreign policy. And he became afraid when he got a message from the Russians inviting the U.S. to intervene with the United States in Egypt. Because Kissinger was afraid that what this meant was that if this happened, this would boost Soviet presence, their legitimacy in the Middle East, the oil-rich center of the struggle for global power. The U.S. did not want to have to share its hegemony in the Middle East with the Soviet Union. So he sent a rather not so subtle message, of course kept secret from most people that night, by putting U.S. forces on a global nuclear alert, essentially telling the Russians to stay out, while at that point he finally contacted Golda Meir and said, okay, the game's over, you've got to respect the ceasefire, and you've got to allow the food and water to go in. But this is characteristic of what the United States has done on more than 30 occasions. I'm just kind of hitting here, as I said before, impressionistically. I learned an awful lot from Daniel Ellsberg. Ellsberg is best known in the United States for the Pentagon Papers. He did the research on the decision-making of succession of U.S. presidents for the war in Vietnam. He made that public in 1971, making himself vulnerable to 115 years in prison. What most U.S. people didn't know about Ellsberg was that he was involved in designing U.S. nuclear war plans for both Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. And reminds us that when Kennedy took power, the U.S. integrated operational plan called for a first strike attack, which would have killed about 420 million people in Soviet Union, China, and Albania, with another 100 million people dying over time as the fallout blew to Japan and other countries. And what Dan teaches us having worked on U.S. policy, is that the U.S. has viewed its nuclear weapon, as Secretary of War Stimson said after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as essentially like a gunman having a six-gun ostentatiously on your hip. And that in repeated crises, what U.S. Governments have done has been use their nuclear weapons like a cowboy six-gun, pulling the gun out, pointing it, and whether or not you pull the trigger, the gun has been used.
How many are the lives that are scattered all around, from the sword and the bomb and the gun? How many are the tears that have fallen on the ground when the darkness of war blots out the sun? Give me peace in the land, give me love from a fellow man, give me the voices of children raised in song. The time it is now to turn my sword into a plow. It's time for us all to get along.
Nuclear weapons that the Russians and the Americans have are on hair trigger alert right now, and they've been this way since the 1970s. So here's a poem. It's called Mother Earth. We take Mother Earth for granted and pretend that she can't die. We walk on the earth, we breathe the air, we drink the water, we take it for granted. The sun shines, the rain falls, plants grow and give us food, forests grow and give us shelter, we take it for granted. Young women and men are fertile, they produce perfect children. The human lifeline is strong, we take it for granted.
Give me peace in the land, give me love from a fellow man, give me the voices of children raised in song. The time it is now to turn my sword into a plow. It's time for us all to get along.
A nuclear war that would destroy this Garden of Eden could start at breakfast time and be over before lunch. We pretend that this can't happen. One missile-firing submarine can destroy every big city in North America, Europe, and Asia. We pretend it can't happen. 100 megatons of nuclear blasts could bring on a nuclear winter, shrouding the Earth in icy darkness. America and Russia have between them 4,600 megatons on missiles, warheads ready to fire right now. We pretend it can't happen. Flash, blast, smoke, darkness, nuclear winter, deep freeze, starvation, fallout, and disease, even now, can be short days away. We pretend it can't happen.
Start to wonder why all the world isn't peaceful and free. How many turn their heads when they tally up the dead, saying this has not to do with me. Give me peace in the land, give me love from a fellow man, give me the voices of children raised in song. The time it is now to turn my sword into a plow. It's time for us all to get along.
It's been a combination of two things. One is something the previous speaker has alluded to, which is the increasing reliance, starting with the 2001 NPR, going through 2002 National Security Strategy, and now the 2006 National Security Strategy, for increasing reliance on nuclear preemption.